Um, so yeah, I'm Shaun. I don't know how much, I think I had this in a bio, so maybe you read it, but it's all, bios are so weird. So I'll just tell you what feels like important to me to set for you to know. I'm a poet, choreographer, dancer living in London right now. I have written dance criticism, but these days I mostly find myself writing poetry criticism, poetry reviews, but I do have a history writing dance criticism. I did the Spring Back Dance Academy training platform that was alive and well in the beginning of the pandemic. I was kind of a pandemic child of that program. And since then, I've just kind of kept a really faded interest in talking about poetry, dance, art, thinking about what's going on between me and this thing I'm experiencing and what is the language I can cultivate to describe this experience for someone, or as something, one of my favorite writers, her name's Sheila Heti. Also, I can speak very quickly. So if it's ever way too fast, and I think just as fast, if it's ever too fast, please go back and say that again. Please just raise a hand or say shout out. But one of my favorite writers, Sheila Heti, she says the art of reviewing for her kind of has this idea of making something better for someone else, which kind of has this, for me, instantiates this kind of idea that she understands something that about the work that other people don't understand. And it's not about treating other people you know, like they don't know things, but how might you, as a reviewer, give information, give context for something that was going to help the next person experience it, understand it more, which doesn't necessarily mean like it more or enjoy it more. It can just be understanding, which can lead to repudiation, which can lead to, wanting something to not exist, which is a interesting feeling that can arise at some interesting junctures. But just to start and for us to go around to kind of see where everyone's kind of heart is. I want to start with a very quick icebreaker that we're going to go around and hopefully answer. And the question I want to ask you, that I want you to answer, is if you could have all the money in the world to write, what would you write about? If you could just write about anything and get paid all the money you needed to live and be happy, and that was just kind of your thing, what would you write about if you were given the opportunity? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think. And while you do that, I'm going to go upstairs and get a light for my face because I can't just keep looking at nothing. Does everyone have, there we go. Does everyone have an answer? More or less? Okay, I'll go first. I think, actually, maybe I don't need to go. It's pretty straightforward, but because I proposed it, if I could write about anything, I think I'd probably just write, I don't know. I feel like if I could write about anything, I'd probably write about nature. If I had all the money in the world, I think I'd probably write about nature. I don't think I do, but nature does figure in my writing a lot, but I think I'd really focus hard. So I'm gonna pass it off to the people I just see on the list, and we'll just go down like that. So next is Dance Art Journal.
Hi. Obviously, I would write about dance because I'm dancer journal. No. I also was thinking about nature and specifically about if I had to really pick one thing to focus on, I guess it would be lichens. Because they're one of those organisms that like scientists still don't really know anything about them. And I've been really fed up with art and humanity and just thinking in general. And I feel like thinking about nature and thinking about a different organism and how it operates and its own sort of form of intelligence is the most sort of pleasurable thing to be thinking and writing about. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for making me recognize. I just said nature, I didn't specify at all what kind of nature, and which is kind of a sin because everything really, if you think about it, is nature. It comes from it in some way. So thank you for being specific, and feel free to have that level of specificity as we go forward. Next, I see Sophie Thomas.
Hello. This is a tricky question. I think I immediately put it into dance context, which is interesting. But my first thought would be that I'd love to like write and document from inside a studio in a process while things are happening like organically with lots of people around. So it's quite like a social thing. Yeah, movement and social and people. And is that an answer?
It is definitely an answer. Thank you. Kind of like an embedded, almost like an embedded writer, embedded critic in a way, kind of as things are happening. Interesting. Next is Clara.
Yeah. Recently, I've been wanting to like describe my friends a lot. I think because I'll be moving away from them this summer, and I kind of just like want to grasp their character, I guess. Also, like write about my mom the same way because that I do that a lot already. Like it invites me to understand her more. So I think just write about the people in my life.
You'd make a great novelist. That's what most novelists
Yeah.
are doing. And I have a very bad ego and narcissism, so I find it very difficult to write about other people in ways that like represent them wholly. And so it's really interesting to hear that that is something you like to do, because I feel like you get really interesting. Being able to represent people is a really difficult thing, but obviously really worthwhile. So yeah, thank you. Next is Tom.
I would probably want to write about cinema, just because I'd love to just watch movies every day, all day. And I love unpacking films, you know, I love having conversations with people about films. And but what you said, Sophie, has made me feel like I want to be on set, or I want to be with like Werner Herzog in the Amazonia, you know, trading through the jungle, writing what's happening on set and who's fighting who, and all that stuff would be quite fun as well, you know.
I wish I had as much of a love for cinema as I think the smartest people I know are the people who watch movies. I just don't have, I don't know why, I just never kind of got into that
Too long.
thing. I just never got into it. But I'm so envious of people who can just like, I don't know, it's just, I don't know, maybe just because I would just watch like Family Guy and like I'm just trying to drown out the noise of existence. Um Next is Saskia. Did I say that right? Saskia?
Um, um, Interesting question. I would write about my ancestors. The interesting bit for me is the money part, because I don't know if I had loads of money, I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't write for money. I don't know, it confuses me, but I don't know if I'd publish those stories. You know, I'd probably just write the stories of my ancestors and then archive the verb for that word, my stories, then as well to pass it on. Yeah, to my ancestors, not to like, you know, anyone else.
It's
Maybe
interesting. It's interesting you started with the kind of publishing and money, or some of the first words you said, and I'm like intimately in this idea of how money changes what you publish with something else right now. And so it's interesting that that was the kind of, I find it interesting that that angle was the first thing, because money does change things, you know, money does change things. Next we have, is it Zhao?
Yeah. I would write a history of my university's dance department. And but not from like a, I think from like a traditional historian perspective, but like sort of like writing a family history, I think. And I think like similar to Clara, I think it's because like a lot of lecturers are leaving right now. And I sort of feel like I want to like sort of hold on to them, like the people that I never really got the chance to meet. Yeah.
Thank you. Next is Daljinder.
I think I would write still about art and still not anything specific about which form of art, like dance. I think I'm someone who likes a lot of things and is okay with liking a lot of things. Um, stuff with this visual arts film, I have all these interests, but I think critique it, like going beyond like traditional reviews and critiques, like deep dives. Like, I'm quite interested in sometimes like it might be a specific area of say like the use of pink in a show and just going into the etymology of pink and like going into like why does this color make us feel this way and like things that maybe you maybe wouldn't think people are interested about, so people won't write about it, but like actually whatever would take my fancy and then actually like uncovering the history of it and maybe the significance and that kind of symbolism and context. I really enjoy picking out why the kind of psychology and how history comes together and how we kind of perceive the way things that we perceive, whether it comes to color or like movement or like even with the metaphor exercise that we did from last year in session, like how you kind of have those contexts that you know across cultures. I always find that interesting, that intersection of like how art often reflects the culture it's made in.
There's a lot in what you're saying, but I'm just particularly latching onto the kind of this idea of intersections and the kind of knottedness, you know, even you're talking about the color pink, but even that, where pink is, who's wearing it, how much of it is, what like that already comes with so much knots that writing can help and not necessarily untangle itself in this in ontologically inside of it, but untangle it for you. So yeah, interesting. A lot. There's a lot there, and yeah, art is huge. And what is art? So therefore, your subject, it could be kind of endless. Thank you. Next, we have Elspeth.
Hi, yeah. I think if I could write about anything, I would pick teen dramas, because I feel like they're quite like a maligned element of culture, and I guess pop culture is quite maligned more generally, but I'm really interested in like the melodrama of them and also how like they can sort of be like vehicles to actually explore like really traumatic things, but it kind of gets like slipped in amongst all the kind of like other stuff that's going on. And I'm really like obsessed with shows like Riverdale, which are like so heightened in terms of their melodrama, but then actually like there'll be something which is sort of like quite like deep within there, but then there'll just also be like loads of serial killers running around. So yeah, I would just write about them endlessly if I could.
Yes, I mean, I was just reading this article about it was this, I think it was in the New Yorker or New York Times, that this guy did this research project, and he's basically like, why are teenagers' lives horrible right now, like more horrible than they've been in the past? And I think the deduction was cell phones, but I think people got upset, particularly when it just felt like it was a simplistic answer. And so it's just that's what you're saying is reminding me of like the kind of, I don't know, it makes me wonder, are teenagers' lives actually more horrible than ours were? Like I mean, I guess I was a teenager like 7 years ago, but I wonder if it's like increasing exponentially. And the like interesting, the kind of narratives and interesting bits about their lives that are worth continuing to look at, because we all have to pass through that if we're lucky. Thank you. Next, we have Pooja.
Hi. Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I was immediately first drawn to fiction because I love kind of just fiction writing. But after hearing kind of everyone's answers, I would say, like, my mom always says that she wishes she could write because she has so many stories to tell. So I kind of want to go around starting first with my friends and family and find all the people who I find really interesting, who are full of stories, but don't necessarily want to or can archive it in some way. And I think what money buys you is time, right? So it's just great. I can go around, I can travel everywhere, go to different parts of the world, meet different interesting people that I want to like hold in history or like archive in some way. So yeah, that would do.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Amina.
Hey guys, I can't put on my camera today because it's kind of gonna ruin the sound, so it has to stay on for now. But my answer is somewhere in between everyone else's. I think I'm really kind of obsessed with like the 60s and 70s, like on like radical movements in Africa, because of what I studied. And so I think like a social history or like a cultural history of that time and examining why we've lost that radical potential and how it's led us here now is kind of the question that I'm always thinking about in relation to Black culture and Black art generally, diasporically. And so I think that is something I would want to get the roots of. And in the sense of like everyone's talking about oral historiography and just kind of that oral archival documentation. But yeah, that's kind of me, what I would do.
Great. Thank you, Amina, for closing that off. And thank you, everyone, for sharing. There's obviously such wide interest. And I'm actually quite refreshed that not everyone said dance, because I thought that was what it was going to be. And I'm refreshed that not to say dance isn't worth writing about, but then it makes me question, and hopefully you can keep this question for you, why write about dance? Why do this? Because the thing is, you can write about all the other things you have just stated. And so there's a reason you're here, and there's a reason that this particular form, for whatever reason, is pulling you to consider it. Yeah. The next thing I want to do is a little bit less time than I wanted to do originally, but it's fine. I wanted to just read a quote, and I'll put it up on the screen because I think I should be able to screen share. I'm just going to share the quote I want to read, and I want to have a very, very brief discussion about what we think it might mean as we take it into our first kind of video watching moment. I'm just going to put this in focus, and I'm going to highlight this in, let's do a better color than that. No, that was the wrong color. No. There. So this is a quote from Rilke. Rilke was a poet, German poet, Romantic poet, European poet, from 1875 to early 20th century, early 20th century, like 20s. And without going too much into him, because he's a kind of a major figure for many people, I took this quote from one of his kind of most defining books or collections of his time, which were letters he wrote to this random poet who said, "I want your feedback on my poems." And naturally, Rilke said, "What I think doesn't matter. It matters what you think about your writing." But he did this obviously more eloquently than that. And the first lines of that book are this, which I'm going to read out. And I just want you to consider this for a little bit. So, "My dear sir, your letter reached me just a few days ago. I want to thank you for the deep and loving trust it revealed. I can do no more. I cannot comment on the style of your verses. Critical intent is too far removed from my nature. There is nothing that manages to influence a work of art less than critical words. They always result in more or less unfortunate misunderstandings. Things are not as easily understood nor as expressible as people usually would like us to believe. Most happenings are beyond expression. They exist where a word has never intruded. Even more inexpressible are works of art, mysterious entities they are, whose lives, compared to our fleeting ones, endure." So this was originally written in German, but there is a different translation, one that I want, which kind of titles this workshop, in this part where he says, "There is nothing that manages to influence a work of art less than critical words." In the translation I have here in this book, it actually says, "Nothing touches a work of art so little as words of criticism." And I just wanted to ask, with that being said, does anyone have maybe, I don't know, what does hearing that do to you? What does hearing that make you think about criticism, about the work of criticism, about the work of experiencing?
I've read this book because I have the little Penguin Black Book version of it, and it was a really inspiring, it's an amazing little piece of text.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, this kind of remind, because I studied film and I made quite a few short films, and something I remember thinking or kind of realizing, because I think I just take films for example, but I guess any piece of work, it's so easy to unpack a piece of work and criticize it, or
Mm.
or project your understanding as some kind of objective meaning on it. But
Mhm.
I don't know, to me this is kind of the idea. It's like I watch films very differently now, because it's really hard to kind of outright, it's easy to say if a film's like a masterpiece or great, but I think it's harder to kind of, when a film's in the middle, because you obviously realize how much work and how many factors made it not possible for it to be quote unquote perfect. And so the same
Mhm.
with writing and whatnot. It's like, as people, we all have our own um experience and voice or interpretation of things, and so it's kind of futile to definitely uh you know, criticize or talk about someone else's piece of work in
Mhm.
certain ways, because it's like kind of the nature of art itself, isn't it? It's like ultimately it's not, you share it, but it's not really for anyone else. The process of making it is really the magic, is really the art, I believe.
So then I would ask you, why, so then if you do it as you are in this program, I suppose, then what do you think you're doing? And you don't have to answer that, someone else can, or if you want to.
Um, I think it's interesting because I suppose with the quote, the first thing I saw about misunderstandings was like the danger of them. It also reminds me misunderstandings of something like of Jane Austen, where everyone's going to get annoyed each other, something like consequences. But I
Mm.
think there's something nice about, even though like it kind of almost says like criticism is being it's dangerous or pointless or has consequences, but actually, even though most happenings are beyond expression, it's kind of a very much a part of human nature to still try. Like it doesn't matter. Like even we obviously, as intent trying to be critics, are taking a very significant point of being like, you should listen to me potentially, and giving an opinion. But I think actually, just generally, I think it's quite, we're just doing what other humans would be doing, like even audience members, and it doesn't matter if you're a critic, you kind of want to put your own meaning on something
Mm.
you've seen or watched or experienced. And
Mhm.
actually, while criticism is tricky because often it's a written work and there isn't that dialogue, sometimes it
Mhm.
can be that spark to or even a bigger dialogue. I think with criticism, that's what I've enjoyed and I've enjoyed reading. I've
Mm.
gone, oh yes, that's made me think in a different way. And actually I enjoy the dialogue that it creates.
Mm. Mm. I mean, the words that keep coming out, I'm hearing, are meaning, and meaning is a really big one. And the idea of meaning being, I suppose, being critical and important to us as humans. Yeah. Anyone else have
Oh,
more thoughts on this? Maybe something radically different, or something expressing disagreement with something you've heard, or with the text itself. Yes, Amina, I see a hand for you.
I guess I was just gonna say it feels like he's saying to a certain extent that there's a level of like mediation that the critic has between art, as in you're you're not a translator, but you are a medium through which you're interpreting the art, and he's saying there's some level of truth that's like distilled in the work of art that is not exactly expressible. And I
Mm.
guess the point of criticism is to endeavor to express that in some way, and yeah, try and impart what you saw or felt or
Mm.
experienced to
Mhm.
another person in some capacity. But that was my interpretation.
Mhm. Elspeth, and then Pooja.
Yeah, I think everything, thanks so much for bringing this, and everything everyone said is so interesting. I was just gonna say, like, I know it's a bit different about in the different translations, like I think touches versus influences are like a little bit different, but in this translation with like there's nothing that manages to influence a work of art less than critical words, like I guess is the point of criticism to influence the art. It might not really be to do that, like it might be more to like create a conversation around it, or like it might not be so much to influence the art, it might more be like around response, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
rather than the art itself. That's just what it made me think of.
Mhm. And right, yeah, the original context of this is, I think, a person saying, I want you to tell me my poems are good or bad or need work. And so when we're thinking about the word influence in this context, he wanted Rilke to influence his writing, whereas touch, which I prefer actually, is to say nothing, criticism doesn't touch the work, is kind of a neutral thing. Like to not touch is not a good or a bad thing, it just is. And there's something interesting about that. So yeah, thank you for bringing up that relationship between those words and how it's different. Yeah, really, really interesting. And lastly, Pooja, I don't think there are any other raised hands. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, so I was gonna say that this quote brought up a lot of thoughts that I was having about sort of criticism versus kind of development, like developing or like criticism versus creativity. So I think like for me, if I have a piece of work and I'm very careful about who I show it to. So it's kind of like talking to your friends about a problem or talking to a therapist, because there's someone who's coming at it kind of from the outside and someone who's coming at it from your internal process. So I feel like criticism is its own creative process. And it's like it has its own world, and it's like starting something new. It's like art begetting art. Like I see criticism as a form of art in itself. But criticism can't touch the art because it's creating its own new art. Whereas if someone wants to like touch the art, they kind of have to think about the world and think about the process from a very different lens, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah.
Well, I'm hearing the idea of criticism being its own, you said art begets art, and criticism being its own kind of life in the world that has some relationship to the original thing, but isn't that thing. And I think that's an interesting place. I think that's kind of where I align every time I'm writing a review. I'm thinking about what is it is this thing, because when I first started writing reviews, I was quite like essayistic, and it was just like I was using the art as a way to maybe explain something else, which is a kind of more essayistic form of criticism. Whereas, the reviews I'm writing now for different publications, big or small, people want to be told whether they should buy the book or whether they should go see the thing. And so there's also a level of asking you as a connoisseur of language and intake of art to evaluate, to tell us, is this thing good? Is this thing worth my 10 pounds to get in? Is this thing worth me, taking time out of my night to go see? Is it worth buying the book and taking it home and then further reading? And these are all kind of questions that are present in a lot of what you all are bringing up. I think really the question is like, what do you want criticism to do for you, or what do you want your criticism to do? Because yes, we can do reviews that explain the work but don't really tell us whether it's good. We can have reviews that tell us this is bad, this is good, and that might be enough for us, but we don't actually ever get an explanation as to why. We can have criticism that uses the work, the dance, whatever it is, to explain another phenomenon in the world, or to explain another concept. And so I think as a critic, I'm always considering this question, what do I want my consideration of this artwork to do? And then that goes into whether I like it or not, whether I'm the best person to, I'm experiencing, I have a 3-book review that was due tomorrow that I asked for another week on, that I just, I've been reviewing a lot of English books by English authors, books by British authors. And sometimes I feel like I don't even know how to approach them, just because it is a different language context. There are references in these books that must go over my head. And at the same time, I need to get paid. I need to get paid the little amount of money critics get paid. So I'm like, I am going to review it. And so, but these questions of like, who am I reading this thing? What is this thing doing when it comes into contact with me are always questions coming up for me. And whether my criticism is touching the work or influencing the work, particularly books. If I write a review of someone who's written their first book, I can be quite, I'm going to stop sharing this very quickly. I can be quite blunt, and because I'm very strong-minded and I'm a very quick thinker, and there are very times like people writing their first books, I can just be like, this is bad, this is not good, this is bad because of XYZ. And I can praise things that are very small. And so kind of finding my own critical identity. And I don't think a critic is someone who's meant to always be nice. I think niceness is a invention of is a pastime that is not afforded to a certain types of people. And meanness is also a type of, and I don't think I'm mean at all, but I think knowing when you're writing that sometimes people are asking you to be firm, people want to know what you think, should I go see it? And sometimes people just want the kind of loftiness of description, the loftiness of interpretation, the loftiness of meaning. So yes, thank you for those responses to that prompt. What we're going to do now is, and this will, I'm glad we added that break in, which has kind of cushioned us because we have gone a little bit over, but I think these discussions, for me, the discussions are always the most eye-opening part. I want us to do things which we're going to do now in the second half, which is going to start with watching a video by a choreographer. And what I want you to consider as we are watching this, well, essentially, I want you to write 2 reviews. Maybe the best way to say this, I want you to take notes as you would to write a review. Right? Can I just get a sense of who's written a review for before, or is this going to be? There's different? Okay, great. So then instead of thinking about it as writing a review, what I want you to, I think I wrote this on I did, great. I'm going to go back to screen sharing my screen because that might be a better way for you to think about writing a review. So the 4 things I want you to consider as we watch this video are essentially the 4 steps that I think happen with any kind of engagement with a piece of art. So the 4 steps are description, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation. And those are big, broad categories that we could go into all night about what they really are. But I've just kind of summed them up into one question, just so that we can feel we have a little bit of an insight into what the point of that step is. So description, what do I sense? What do I see? What do I taste? What do I hear? What are the textures? What are the actions, since we're working with dance? What are the bodies? What are the actions? What space are they in? What time? What's the timing? What's the music? What kind of energy? What's the relationship of dancers person to person? I'll include, and I'll email this to Angel, a kind of this Baster chart, which is good for describing dance. It's a step of, it's kind of known as the dance elements, but these are the things that we use to create dance, but also ways in which we can use we won't go into that too much now because that's a different field, but I'll make sure that gets into like the resource pack for this whole experience. But yeah, so I just want you to start with description, then analysis. How did the artist do it? Of course, you're not going to watch the whole video. You're going to watch an excerpt. So you're going to be doing a lot of guesswork, as we are normally when we're watching anything. We're guessing, how did the artist make this? What people did they use to make it? What techniques did they use to make it? What techniques are they using? What colors are they using? What environment are they using to create an effect? How did the artist make the work? How, if in your perception? Interpretation. Why did the artist create it, and what does it mean? Which is obviously the question, is kind of the big money question for a lot of people experiencing things. Why did the artist create it, and what does it mean? Which can really go anywhere if you can prove it, if you can use your description and your analysis to back up your interpretation. And then finally, evaluation. Is it a good work of art? Meaning, is it accomplishing something? Is it accomplishing what you think as an outside eye? Is it accomplishing what you think it wants to be accomplishing? Is it not accomplishing that? I mean, these are such big categories, and I feel like it's a heresy to be able to skirt through them. But just to think, these are all elements. Not every review has all 4 of these, but having these down as ways to think about how you might approach thinking about writing some sort of review are good. Some reviews are description heavy. Some reviews are evaluation heavy. Some reviews are interpretation heavy. And so I just want to give you these 4 general guidelines as ways of thinking about what you're going to watch. And yeah, I think I've said enough. Are there questions I should be aware of? Questions? When you're writing, we're going to watch the review, or watch the review. We're going to watch the video. If you want, you can take notes during. If you'd rather watch it all than take notes, there will be time afterwards so that you can do that. The clip is 10 minutes long, but we might stop a bit sooner. And that's where we will stop it. You can hear me, right? Feel free to keep writing if you have thoughts that you need to release. Right now we'll take 5 minutes to just stew, stand up, stretch your legs, drink water, and if you don't need the 5 minutes, then you can just begin writing. If you do, take it, and when you come back, yeah, jot down any last notes and start composing like a 3 to 4 minute thing. Sorry, 3 to 4 sentence thing, 75 words, 100 words. If you're back and hearing, feel free to keep jotting down notes. Or if you're past your note phase, then I would like you to take the next. Did that give you time? Right, I should tell you a little bit more about the review you're going to be writing. So yes, just turn your camera on or give a thumbs up when you're back so that I can see that you are there, because there is a little bit of guidance as we go into this next part. Yeah, so I'll start saying the instructions, and when the people who I don't know if are back yet come back, I'll repeat it for them, which can be hearing it for the second time for you. So what I'd like you to do is, like I said, I want you to write a 75 to 100 word review, which I want you to think of. If you have experience writing reviews, then that's good. And if you don't, then I want you to think of it as a mini kind of just a mini review, just kind of like, what did you like it? Did you think it was good? What happened? You know, what did you see? Again, going back to those questions of description, what did you sense? Any sensory details, analysis, if you can at all devise how the descriptions came about. Obviously, we saw a 10-minute excerpt of a one and like a couple and some change hour-long work. And so I'm not asking you to like go in to make some big statements about the work, though if you want to do that with what you've seen, you're very welcome to do that. But I want you to take the time to compose a little review that, at whatever level of incorporation of description, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation you'd like, makes some sort of make some sort of thing you could offer to other people to read, seeing as you've seen the same work. Now, what I haven't told you is that I actually want you to do it twice. And I want you to do it one way, which is as if you were writing an article that you're going to have published, say in Dance Art Journal or in some other dance publication, something that you know other people are going to read this in either in their hands or online, which necessitates its own kind of style of writing. And then I want you to write the same review, but I want you to see how it would change if you wrote it as, you know, I think Tom, you said something about this and you said you write a lot like you speak. I want you to write it as if you were explaining it to someone at a pub and you were 2 or 3 drinks in and it wasn't so dire. Does that make sense? So there's a kind of, you know, I'm a critic, I'm putting my brain on, and I'm going to tell you something about the inexpressible being contained inexpressibly in the expressed about this work, which is a Wittgensteinian idea. And then I also want you to have the pub, I'm maybe a bit tipsy, or I'm not on my critic BS, and I'm just going to tell my friend what I thought about the show, very informally. And you can have the same thoughts, but I want to see, can you write the same review in 2 different styles? Is that clear? Is that enough information to go forth? No more than 75 words, no more than 100 words, 75 to 100 words, even shorter if you can manage it.
Does it matter which one we do first?
No. No, it does not matter which one you do first, though I have a suspicion doing the more informal one will be easier after. But you're allowed to do that one first if you like. And just write it down on your computer in your own hand if that helps. But nothing, I mean, 75 words is really like 5 sentences, 5-6 sentences max, I think. So yeah, is that enough information? So let's take, it's 7:24 right now. Let's take 15 minutes. So you have about 7 minutes to go over all your notes. Let's take 15-ish minutes and I'll check in after 15. We might have to squash a little bit about the last activity because I do want to make sure you're out at 8 as per the contract we agreed upon, and so that you feel I'm not abusing your time. So Yes, but let's go for 15 minutes and see where we're at in 15. Yeah? Feel free to turn your camera off. Can I just do a check where everyone's at? My sense, is there anyone who has two things? Two separate. Some of you have one. Looks like, raise your hand if you, can you raise a hand if you have two? So everyone else has one. So in the interest of time, and because there is supposed to be a bit of homework, for those of you who've written two, great, quick thinkers, I love that. What we're gonna do is actually, I'd like to just stay with one for now. And I'm sure you already began to consider how you might write your first one, or you might write your second one. So I'm sure there's already a bit of a question of how you might do that. But perhaps we can make Angel the second one the kind of homework for tomorrow. Obviously, we're not checking it, you're not getting a grade, but perhaps we could come to the beginning of the meeting. Is there one tomorrow?
Tomorrow? No, next week.
Next week, even better. Maybe we can make the beginning of the session next week a check-in with these second ones. Can we do that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Great. So what I want to do then, in lieu of not having a second one, I mean, I'll tell you why I wanted you to do that, because, or no, I won't tell you why. I want to ask, for those of you who did write two, what was your experience like? And then for those of you who didn't write two, but I imagine maybe began to write, think about the other one you didn't do, what that experience, what was already generating in you. So maybe we can start with either Zhao or Elspeth first, or both, and then we can, and then I want to hear, lastly, I want to hear a couple of these, just to see what happens, like instant writing, So what was your experience of translating from one tone, perhaps, or one style to the other, Elspeth or Zhao?
I did the formal one first before doing the more informal one, the bar one. And I felt like after doing the first one, the second one suddenly kind of felt like a release. Like all the words started coming out, and I felt like it seemed more emphatic and more I guess it's more of me in it compared to the first one, but in a different way, me in a different way. Yeah.
Could we hear your second one? I'm just curious.
Yeah. She frenzies around and looks kind of desperate, and there's people at the back looking like 80s sci-fi characters starting off the space, and she's the only one wearing shoes. She pushes really hard against the wall, but obviously it's not moving. And then she somehow gets on the ground, question mark. Oh, and the music is super creepy, kind of Dracula-esque vibes, but electronic. So she's on the ground. There's this really pretty and tender moment where some light appears at her elbow, like, hello, I'm here, but in a cute way. And then she lays in it like she's really comfy.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Elspeth, what was your experience like translating from? I'm guessing maybe you did the informal one first, since you asked.
No, I actually did it the same as Zhao. I actually
Okay.
had really agreed with everything you said. I just felt like I could be way more honest in the second one. I felt like it was a bit of a release, and I was thinking more about the first one, and then the second one I was like, oh, I just feel like I can be more honest here, and I don't really have to temper anything.
Yeah. Can we hear? Let's hear. Do you mind reading both for us, just so we can hear?
Yeah, they're
what
really
honesty
short.
sounds like.
That's fine. Okay, so the first one was bodies punctuate a space that might be a factory but has the atmosphere of a church in its austerity and palpable coldness. These bodies are alienated both from me as a viewer and from each other as they point away from one another, an urgency to escape permeating their limbs as they claw at the walls. The sunshine landing on the dancer's skin is an obvious but effective motif at the end, providing much needed light, dancing with their flesh. And then the second one was, maybe I was just too tired and I brought my whole day with me into how I viewed this, but I just found it the dire combination of being both a bit boring and a bit depressing. It felt kind of peaceful and soothing towards the end with the light, but mostly I just wanted it to finish. I think because I'd had a long day, it made the whole thing seem worse and more futile, but everything about it left me feeling cold today.
Wow.
But
Thank
I feel
you.
like I feel sort of bad reading it, which is interesting because it's like super critical, and I would never be that critical, not with friends, if you know what I mean.
And why wouldn't you be that critical?
I don't know. Like, I just feel like because I feel like I found what you were saying about the fact that you have been really critical, really interesting, and maybe like that was really nice to hear. So thanks for sharing that, because I would just feel a bit bad. Like, even when I was reading that there, I was like, oh, should I change it in my head? Like, while I'm reading it aloud? Because like it sometimes feels really bad to just like not like a work that someone's put loads of time and energy into, if you know what I mean. Like, I feel like that just because I don't like it, like, doesn't mean that they didn't care loads about that art.
Yeah. Well, that's the eternal question, and something that's really prescient to me as a younger viewer. I feel horrible when I have to give my real opinion about things, but then we think of like, but I don't know, like that. People, when I try to express this to my editor friends, they're like, but people know the difference between not liking it and engaging with it and being mean, and so like if you're engaging with it and you're meeting the work where it is and still saying it's not reaching me because of XYZ, obviously people are going to get upset, and many people can't separate the art from the artist, which is a whole other conversation about many of like the field of criticism in general. But yeah, I think your feelings and the way you're talking about, I've had a long day, and so definitely my perception of what I'm, and being able to recognize that, because if you go watch the work again, you watch on video, then you have a different perspective. And if it's the same perspective, then that means there's something about that work that's actually like that perhaps. Or if it's different, then that means you have to then talk about, but thinking about what the work is doing to you based on the experiences you've had, whether that's a shit day at work or what kind of whatever with someone else, that then becomes part of your own language, by which you then think about how does what the work is doing not only to me but with me as I experience it. And that's also worth writing about, depending on the publication. Some publications don't want that, but some do. You know what I mean? Like, because bringing your whole self to the writing is something. And if you're not writing for publication, then you can just write what's honest to you. And the thing about, I've had a shit day and this work didn't make it better, or like this work kind of kept it going. That was actually the most interesting part to me. That I was like, oh, I want to hear more about that. Like what, you know what I mean? So yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. You said this bit of depressiveness, which kind of gets a little bit, and I'll just so I can, I don't want to feel like I did like everyone, most people only get through the first one. And so I'll read mine just because it mentioned depressiveness. This is the formal one. And then we'll go into some of the other ones. I wrote, 4 dancers in matte canvas colors traipse a white, bricky, hollow space. Though their spirits seem just as hollow, the eerie beams and drone piano connotes as much. The conviction of the dancers, some in a white girl panic, 2 others turning counter and clockwise in an unsettling yin-yang, enraptures my focus. There's a depressive existential quality to the work that makes me wonder if the dance represents the unknowable depths of consciousness, the dark, dank, though active basements of the mind. If this is what Gil wanted, it is achieved, and continued as one dancer, after 10 minutes, for the first time, enters the space to haunt it. Okay, so that was what I came up with, and I started then trying to write the second one. I'm not going to say what it took me to get what I was having to battle with yet, but I want to hear what other people wrote, and when you started imagining how you might write the second one, what was it you were starting to do? So anyone else?
I'll happily go. Let me find it on my screen. Right. An exposed brick wall stage is set with 4 bodies populating the space. As 2 clockwork figures slowly rotate, they provide a notion and balance of time passing, whilst a third cuts up the space, disregarding any sense of order. Moments of decay and desperation shout to the viewer as acts of helpless destruction repeat one after the other. The depictions of fight and emptiness, attempting to make sense of the inevitable fragility of humanness, was the very formal one. And then I think when I was thinking about chatting about it, I was using more just like, oh, she was having a bit of a meltdown language. And yeah, I didn't get much further into that, but
could you improv your second review for us right now? You sound like you kind of already started doing it. You're like, she was having a bit of a meltdown and
yeah. Sorry, I feel on the spot. Yeah, maybe she was like having a bit of a meltdown, and that there was maybe lots of like hidden meanings that I didn't quite grasp, but I kept trying to like hook onto. And like I felt like maybe I'd see like an image of the circle of life, and then just before I was about to understand it, it might like get out of my grasp a little bit. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you. Like yeah, thank you. Yeah, what you kept coming back. It's interesting because all, in my opinion, the 3 kind of formal one or informal ones we've had are actually the most like it's like how can we get that, not that, you know, the formal writing is good and like test your skills as a writer, but it's like about finding this balance between like, because people, when you read, like sometimes I read like say articles in the New Yorker or the New York Times or like big American publications, and I think I have this like super, I go there to read like the best sentences and the best syntax and the best grammar. And it's like, you realize that what makes writers at that level so interesting is not that they're actually using these big words and like, it's like super complicated, but actually they're just really able to take really complicated thoughts and simplify them and distill them into a thought as eloquent as, it just felt like there was something I was not able to grasp. You know, you can say that in a million different ways and then you can back it up, but that is a really clear concept that you can work into your review that immediately will get a viewer to be like, oh, I know what that means. I know what it means to have a feeling about something but not quite, something to constantly kind of be on the outer echelon of your experience. Yeah. Anyone else have a first version they'd like to share?
I'll share mine. So I wrote, the space is bare, its white brick paleness intimidating, but accented by a dynamic use of lighting, cutting the space's floor plan to shape, but at times even 3-dimensionally. This is contrasted by the everlasting drumming of an organ riff, building the performance's liminal qualities, giving the audience a sense of untangible inevitability. I can't say that. Some feeling of imprisonment, which the performers physically escape from, bar one, who presses, hits, and kicks the walls before cowering like the rest had, who uncannily have exited, their movements having been so isolated, without watching one closely, no movement is seen at all.
Interesting last sentence. Without watching one closely, no movement is seen at all. Really, really, really interesting one idea just for that piece. Could you, I mean, since I remember you saying in the early, like you said, you write the way you speak. And so I'm wondering, when you began to think of translating it, did it already feel like it was in a language that felt really casual for you? Or was there another level of work you thought you could do to kind of get it to the more informal level?
What, from this to an informal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a weird instinct with the informal to kind of start doing a parody of it in some way. For some reason, because I don't know. So maybe it's seeing things that are seeing things that are serious, and then just having an instinct to frame them in a light that's a parody effectively, but that is relevant. It does associate with me, you know.
And when you say frame it in a parody, you mean like, can you
Like
give like an example of a sentence you used in your formal one and how you would parody that?
how I would parody it over.
How you would parody it.
So,
Parody it.
you know, I wrote like the space is bare, it's white brick paleness, intimidating. But in my parody, I kind of just like the setting of the space reminded me of the Saw movie. And I started writing, I was like, it's as if you're in Saw 5, but in a flashback from Saw 1.
Mm,
Because it really did look like one of the
mm,
scenes from Saw. And the door at the back was even like the door that gets pulled across. It's
yeah.
kind of wild.
I mean, but that's still really descriptive, and that's,
Yeah.
I mean, that comes back to what I was saying at the beginning of something like, because I don't watch films like that, like but a lot of people have seen Saw. And
Mm.
so like to say it's a white brick space is different than to say it's like a Saw, because not only do you get the colors of red, black, and white, these kind of bareness and these rooms that are kind of stark, you also get the kind of horror with that, right? You also get the kind of fear, you also get the kind of unease with the words, with the association of Saw, rather than just white brick,
Yeah.
right? So there's this notion, it's interesting, this notion of parody, which can be really useful in trying to explain art, dance, particularly movement, environment to people. So I wouldn't, it's interesting, that notion seems like you have maybe a natural inclination to be able to connect it to movies, which I have a feeling more people have seen movies than they've seen dance. So I wouldn't run away from trying to explain things through movies, or through other forms. Does anyone else have one they'd like to share? I mean, I want to, hopefully through me kind of commenting on each person, you're kind of getting an idea about form, and I'm thinking about tonality and the different tones you can use to access things, the different ways in which you can bring yourself into the work, as Elspeth we were talking about with Elspeth, as with Tom, with kind of referencing other kind of cultural phenomena, that you get a lot more kind of bang for your buck with those words, like saw versus white, that's already a word count decrease, simplifying things into kind of simpler sentences that we get, like so we were talking about with Sophie. Does anyone else have one they want to share? Saskia, Amina, Pooja, Clara, Dance Art Journal.
I don't know. I feel really self-conscious about it because I don't feel like I know how to write these things. But I'm interested in like the pub thing of like, also that whole thing of like, it depends who your friends are as well, like who you're telling.
Yeah.
Like the first thing that comes to mind for me, like when I thought about writing it, was like, I didn't get it. And then I thought I would tell my friends, so don't expect to get it. And I think also that, yeah, for me, it's quite, I just like flow wrote words when we was watching it, and that helped a lot in terms of having a description to like then extrapolate, what's the word, the meaning out of it. But in terms of context, like I come from a hip hop dance background, and I haven't really been in I haven't been in those kind of spaces where seeing this kind of work, and so it's very interesting to like, how do you describe something when you don't have like a reference point. So I really appreciate all of those comments about like film and all of that. But with like hip hop, I feel like movement is just like, every move is like weighted with like so much culture and like energy, or like vibrant, like there's literally like aliveness in like the tiniest of like things. And this is so interesting because like composition, especially as you said, it's a long durational thing, like it's longer than that. Yeah, it's interesting to me. Like I the only thing I do like that I wrote at the end was, of the serious one, was about with the ending where she curls up. I just said, this is the only part I want to watch. In irreverent silence, she cradles herself. If nothing, just says everything. I can breathe, and that's it.
I mean, there's so much in what you're saying about, I mean, it may sound harsh to say this is the only part I want to watch, but that's a review. That's an evaluation of the work, right? Like that's all the way at the end. But you also gave us a description of what's happening, right? You said as she crawls off, that's the only part I want to watch. You went straight from description all the way to evaluating whether the work was watchable or good at that moment. And that's okay. Some reviewers have that style. In terms of language, and this is why I'll send through to Angel this chart called the Baster chart, which I won't have much time to talk about now, but it's basically this chart by which you can apply to any kind of movement. And we can begin to think about, maybe I should have done that instead, which would have been really great. But like ways in which we can look at dance performances and essentially reconstruct them through language. And there are 6 ways: body, action, space, time, energy, relationship, that we can begin thinking about all these. But I'll send that through, should have gotten to that and didn't. We have 2 minutes left. I guess I know it feels like we spent so much time talking and sharing, and if time flew by, I really thought it was going to go much slower than this, as it didn't. But maybe we can just go around super fast and perhaps just let me know one thing you are curious about going further, or one thing you want to take away from this and keep thinking about. And I'll call you off. Tom, if you wouldn't mind starting.
I quite like talking about the balance in language when writing, or doing kind of criticism or unpacking pieces like this, because it's something I'm really, because I write for an independent magazine about breaking, and it's something that I definitely wanted to pull my own style into my writing and not be kind of I don't know, pulled to trying to be too formalistic or too kind of maybe what feels pandering or something. I definitely, I quite like gonzo journalism. I quite like it when the character of the writer comes through the writing in a sense that you feel like you're sat at the pub chatting with them. So I quite like that discussion we have, because also there's a balance you want to strike, because you don't just want to be writing jargon all the time. You still want to be kind of making some insight or giving some insight. So
thank you. Next to me is Amina.
I guess I was gonna say the part of my review that I felt challenged me the most was interpretation. I don't know how I could feel the confidence or maybe even the authority to to decide on what the interpretation is, and so I think that's something I have to learn and develop, especially as someone who doesn't have like a dance background. To say something like that, I think I would feel a bit too apprehensive.
Yes, I won't say more about that, but I can understand that hesitation. Clara?
I'm still thinking a lot about the quotes that we read in the beginning, and how like from that I feel like the word translation really stuck to me as well. And just the idea that like, because as someone who's bilingual as well, like the experience of like, just because a happening, you don't feel like that is like expressible in, I don't know, in the way it first comes to mind, doesn't mean that it's not worth trying to translate it with whatever you have to use, I guess.
Thank you. Sophie?
Similar to Tom. I just wanted to like say thanks for opening the door of actually how you bring yourself to the work. I think it's really easy that people say like, oh, write from your perspective, and then I don't know, I think just like doing that activity of like, how would you describe it to your friends at a bar, or like the things that what we were talking about that interested us at the very, very start, like they're all like little references that make us who we are and make the writers who we are, and just bringing them into our criticisms as well. It's just like a lovely thing to take in my backpack of tools.
Great, love to hear the word tools and takeaway. Elspeth?
I think I'd take away and just want to say thank you for like feeling like a bit more permission to like be a bit more informal, and also what you said about kind of like bringing in different like references to different kinds of culture, I think makes so much sense when you think about it. But like I definitely think there can be like a bit of pressure to think of criticism as like this really rarefied thing, and like it's not okay to like mention pop culture or horror films or whatever. But actually thinking about it as a reader, I would enjoy that way more. And I really love the piece that Zhao read, like her more informal review. And if I read a review like that, I would really like relate to it probably a lot more than a lot of reviews out there. So just like knowing that, thinking maybe more like a reader as a writer, if that makes sense.
Invaluable thinking as a reader, because being someone who writes like creative writing, I can always be like craft, style, me, and then you're like, but I don't. This means nothing to me, which some people like, but also then we want to touch people with our writing in most cases. So yeah, really astute there. Zhao and then Saskia.
I thought that task was really useful for me, and I feel like being able to write like a really formal one and then a really informal one can like kind of help to then find like what's in the middle, and like maybe there's a sweet spot for it for my own writing as well. Thank you.
Yeah, if we had more time, I think that's what I would have done to like now find the middle point that gives it a bit of, a bit of not up the nosiness, but just a bit of like language, form, a bit of style, expertise, perhaps mixed in with the casualness of speech, which is always going to put, that's always going to go straight to people's heart and ears faster than like academic Baroque language. Yeah. And Saskia.
I'm really excited to receive that list. And I hope that it like begets accessibility, because that's it. I'm here to write about dance because dance isn't accessible in so many ways to me. And so yeah, I would hope that any writing that I do begets accessibility to, whether it be to hip hop dancers or disabled dancers, anyone who wants to. Thank you so much. It was really amazing.